Hi there. Today we're talking about the Grangues massacre, not to be confused with the Graignes massacre. It's not the same spelling and it's not the same place. Now some of you will recognise the reference if I say if you haven't got a scarf for your microphone you can use a head support, but you're saying you've got a scarf and you're right. Now Leon Tardy was a policeman in Paris before the war, and before the war started he decided to move out and change job. He tried a few jobs and then he ended up in Normandy and bought a farm at Grangues. When the war started, Leon was conscripted, but because of his age and having 3 children he was demobilised. Now he heard the call of de Gaulle in June 1940 and he decided to act.
Cet armistice serait non seulement une capitulation, mais encore un asservissement. Or, beaucoup de Français n'acceptent pas la capitulation ni la servitude.
In May 1940, a neighbour brought him 2 British soldiers. They had managed to get out through Dunkirk and they were fleeing before the advance of the German army. Now the resistance wasn't so organised as it was later on, and Leon kept them 9 months on the farm before he managed to get them to escape. He got them fake papers and he registered them as Breton from Brittany. And because at that time a lot of Britons didn't speak French, that was easy to pass. He declares them as Breton seasonal workers and they help on the farm with the Tardy children. So it wasn't until March 1941 that Leon managed to find an escape route. So he took Jim with him to get him out. Now this time a neighbour was in the bar at Dives, a woman, and she was talking to anybody who wanted to hear. She said, "The Germans aren't so clever as that. I know where there are 2 British soldiers hiding." So she was arrested and interrogated. She told all she knew. Leon's wife Marcel and the children had just come back to the farm after milking the cows, and the Germans turn up. She says to Henry to go and hide. The Germans come in. They say, "Where are the 2 British soldiers you got here?" She said, "Well, we haven't got any British soldiers. We had some Breton workers, but they've gone because we've got no work for them." They searched the place, even looked in the bedroom where the British soldiers had been. Didn't find anything, so they went. After they went, Henry turns up. She said, "Where have you been?" He said, "I was hiding under your bed. I saw the German boots walking around the bed, but they didn't think to look under it." So when Leon gets back, he realises Henry's got to go, and so he takes him out by the same route as he took Jim. Now the farmhand, his name was Marcel. He would help Leon in his resistance activities. One day he came home with a pigeon in his musac bag. He said he was worried that it'd make a noise as he went through the German checkpoints. And next morning, Leon and Marcel let the pigeon go with a message on. And that evening, they heard a message on the BBC that told them the message had been received.
Maintenant des messages personnels. Clarisse a les yeux bleus. Nous disons Clarisse a les yeux bleus. Message pour Jupiter.
In 1942, the Atlantic Wall was being built and the Germans instigated obligatory work service for the Frenchmen. Many of these young Frenchmen didn't want to comply with that, so they go AWOL. So there was a procession of young men staying at their farm before moving on. There's also 2 American airmen, 3 Canadian airmen, and a Norwegian airman that came through on their way to freedom. But in March 1944, the Gestapo came to arrest Lyon. The family of Pierre Neville, they lived at the farm Les Ferments, near the chateau of Sarlebo, overlooking Dives. Now they had cows in the marshes just past Cabourg, and had to go and milk them every day. That was 4 miles there and 4 miles back. Now they didn't make hay, so to get hay they had to go to Blandeville, the other side of the Orne Canal, with a handcart, and that was 15 miles there and 15 miles back. The Germans installed gun battery at Sarlebo with 105mm guns. They were the same French guns as at Pointe du Hoc. They also had the same guns at a battery at Mont, where there's now a stud farm. Rommel came in the spring of 44, and he decided those guns at Mont were badly placed, so he moved them further down the hill. Also in the spring of 44, the Germans requisitioned the young men to place Rommel's asparagusses in fields, even boys of 15 like Pierre. And they placed him at Menildar, and then he moved down to Dozulé, where they placed some, and then over to fields at Pont-Frémy. Men of 591 Parachute Regiment, Royal Engineers, they were at Fairford Airstrip, loading in 2 short Stirlings. Now, they weren't called that because they were shorter than the long Stirlings, but they were made by the Short brothers. The planes of 620 Squadron were to bring them across Normandy to land near Ranville. Their mission was to blow up Rommel's asparagusses to allow gliders to land after, and for this they had 5 pounds of explosives in bicycle inner tubes wrapped around their waist. The planes crossed over the channel with no problem, but as they came over the coast, the flak started. It sounded like pebbles hitting the fuselage. Lieutenant Shinner remembers that one man was hit and burst into flames. The pilot and the co-pilot were killed before the plane went down. There was a fire in the middle of the plane and the flames were going backwards. Lieutenant Shinner shouted to open a vent to allow the smoke out. 4 men actually managed to jump before the plane went down. Lieutenant Shinner and others actually survived the crash. Lieutenant Shinner was taken away to be interrogated, and the others were taken to a barn near the chateau. Shortly afterwards, another Stirling crashed. Everybody in that one was killed. Later in the morning, 4 gliders towed by the planes of the 295 Squadron came over and crash landed in the grounds of the chateau. Now the wounded survivors were taken away to Pont du Hoc, to hospital, and the other survivors were taken to the barn near the chateau. The dead were buried in the foundations of a building they were building near the chateau. The 8 men in the stable had been thoroughly searched, but at 2:15 they were led away and then told to lie on the ground. The Staff Feldwebel Weissler shot them one by one with his Walter P38. This had been witnessed by Roland Berthier. He reported to the Count Noblet of the chateau, and Count Noblet took to task the German who shot them. By the German Weissler, he said they were getting restless and he feared they might try and escape. He was actually awarded the Iron Cross for his action, and he actually bragged about it to Count Noblet as if he'd done some heroic action. He probably got it because he fulfilled Hitler's command to shoot saboteurs and commandos. Theresa Malley was the chateau nurse. She'd brought up 3 generations of Noblets. She took it on herself to harness the cart to the donkey, and she organised a team of employees to move the bodies to give them a decent burial. Lieutenant Shinner was the officer who was taken away for interrogation. He remembers the fire starting. It was in the middle of the plane. He shouted to open a vent to let the smoke out because the smoke was coming towards them. With the vent open, it went out the back. There were 5 men between the fire and the cockpit. Then the plane started spinning and went down. There was a loud ripping sound, and he found himself hanging upside down from a tree. And there was fuel dripping on his face. You could see the fire of the plane right near him. He would have been burnt, but somebody came along and saved him. Lieutenant Shinner and the other survivor, they helped tend the wounded. For the pilot and the co-pilot, they couldn't do anything. They were already dead. Shinner thought they'd landed a bit south of their landing zone. So he moved north to try and find the landing zone. But with the hilly country and the woods, he realised there was some way from where they should have been. He's on his way back, and he saw 2 Germans hurrying down the lane and trying to get up the bank towards him. He tried to shoot them with his pistol, but because his arm was wounded, he missed. And there were Germans coming from behind him as well, so the only thing to do was to put his hands up. They were taken 300 yards to the barn near the chateau. One of Shinner's men was allowed to make a sort of bandage on his wound with some rope. After about half an hour, an officer turned up in a car, and Shinner was led to the car, then he was driven away. And they went about 4 kilometres, once having to swerve to avoid a dead German on the road. Shinner thinks he was taken to La Bribourdiere, which is a chateau. He was taken into an officer's room, but he bawled both of them out for dripping blood on his carpet. So he's taken to see another officer, and this officer allowed an orderly to come and treat Shinner's wound. Then he was interrogated, or sort of. The officer asked him for his name and number, which he gave, and then he asked him for more information, saying that if he gave some more information, he'd make sure news of his position would be sent back to England. But Shinner refused, and the officer said, "You're right," and that was it. Now he had been searched, but so rapidly that they missed a list of codes he had, which he was able to use later on, and also his watch, which was under his bandage, and he managed to keep that with him until he got back to England. Now Weissler, who'd shot the 8 airborne men, he was listed as a war criminal, but he was never among the German war dead as a list, and he never returned to Germany. So perhaps he went to South America to hide. Around Pierre Neville's farm at Les Ferments, 2 paratroopers who were caught by the Germans. They'd probably come from the crash at Grangues. Later on, 2 planes skimmed the trees near the chateau of Salabo and crashed in the fields. There were pieces of plane all over the place. Pierre Neville also remembers that there were paratroopers hidden in a sunken lane near the church at Grangues until they could be taken to join the British troops. Now, knowing that the Germans were going to take over Salabo Chateau, Monsieur Balbet, the owner, he asked Monsieur Neville, that was the father of Pierre, to help him move all the valuable stuff out the chateau. They hid it in a barn. One day, Pierre was sent to find the doctor at Ranville. He went on his bike. Just near the bend, near the Mare des Pois, the German officer's car overtook him, and then it suddenly stopped, and everybody in it dived out into the ditches. So Pierre did the same, and an Allied plane came along and strafed the car. In August, Steve was being evacuated, but Pierre's family didn't go. And on the 19th of August, a shell fell in the farm, and Pierre's brother and his grandmother were killed by the shrapnel. So Pierre's mother wouldn't live in the house after that, and they moved out. On the 21st of August, just 2 days later, Grangues was liberated. And when the Germans were pulling out from the chateau where they had the guns, one of the guns got stuck in a corner just before the exit, and so they left it. So that became something for the British troops to come and visit once they moved in. The story of Grangues isn't just a massacre, but also of determination and courage. Now the Christophe family, they lived in the farm at Neuville, not to be confused with Demouville, and that was the farm of the chateau of Grangues. Now Marie Christophe had given birth to a baby girl, André, with an E at the end, on the 29th of May. On the 6th of June, the clinic in Caen, the clinic of the Miséricorde, was bombed. And Marie was in the least damaged building, but she realised she had to get out. So scrambling over rubble, she carried her baby out into the streets. And she found Caen just one big pile of ruins. She had to scramble over rubble to go along the streets. And she got to the first bridge of the Yonne, and that was impassable. It had been completely destroyed. And she went to the second bridge, and that was impassable to vehicles, but pedestrians could scramble across it delicately. Then she was going up the road to the Demi-Lune. It's only half a mile. It took her an hour to get up there, going from pile of rubble to pile of rubble. Once out of Caen, the going was easier, but the nearest friends she knew were at Demouville, 3 miles away. Demouville with an M. Coming out of Caen, she went through Mondeville, and there was a roadblock. But she explained her plight to the German guards there, and they let her through. And on just after that, she was going past a house. There's some people opened their shutters, and then invited her in to rest for a bit. She was able to breastfeed her baby before carrying on to Demouville, and she stayed with her friends for a week. And she had no way of informing her husband, André, with no E, of where she was. They had no telephone. And Marie's husband, André, not to be confused with the daughter, André, he didn't know where she was. And of course, he was worried about her. He'd seen the glow over Caen on the 6th. So he decided to go and find her. He rode to Puy-en-Orge on his bike, but there was a roadblock at the bridge, and nobody was crossing, so he went back home. He went to the chateau of Grangues, where the Germans had their HQ. There were 2 Swedish journalists asking for news of the front line. The German officer there, he was already drunk, and he asked André about his wife, and he told him she was in the clinic at Caen, and he was worried about her, and that he'd been turned back at the crossroads. So the officer said, "Oh, I'll bring you the papers to get through this evening." And sure enough, after André had finished his meal, the German officer turned up the door. He's waving a pistol in one hand and the papers in the other one, and he wanted some more Calvados in exchange for the papers. The next morning, André sets off with an employee from the chateau. At Saint-Neville, which had been bombed, they had to carry their bikes to get across the craters. The only things on the road were German troops and German tanks. The Germans checked their papers, let them go on, but they realised they were coming near the front line. So they went back and down to Argence to go towards Caen. In Caen, the only signs of life were civilians pillaging the ruins. They get to the clinic of the Miséricorde, and you can see the staircase going up to the maternity ward, completely destroyed, and they just find 9 bodies of nuns lying on the ground. So they go out into Caen, desolation. Well, a gendarme tells him where there's some survivors. Well, they go there, still no news of Marie. And so they go to a friend in the south of Caen at Fleury-sur-Orne to have some sustenance before going back home. Marie and her baby André were at the Guillauds at Demouville. She had no means of informing her husband where she was, but she gave pieces of paper to passers-by, asking them to try and get the paper to Grangues. And on the paper, it said where she was and who she was with. On the 14th of June, a bomb fell in the courtyard of the farm. The windows are shattered, and André's cot was showered with glass. But André was okay because Marie had thought that that could happen and she'd covered the pram with pillows. But she realised she had to get out, so she asked the Guillaumes for a pram, and there she was on her way down to Graignes. At 6 p.m, she stopped to eat in a restaurant at Argence and to breastfeed her baby. She rested for an hour. At 7 p.m, she was on her way again. She had 2 hours to get home before the curfew, passing through the shortest route, which went through Saint-Pierre-de-Jonquet. Now, Marie couldn't go through Saint-Pierre-de-Jonquet because there was a roadblock, firm, because the Germans were building a V1 launch ramp. So she made a detour through Clerville, and at Clerville there was a roadblock, but she managed to get through by joining with a lady who just come back from doing her shopping. With great luck, the bridge at La Ham wasn't guarded, and that was because it's partly destroyed. So she carefully picked her way across the remains of the bridge with her pram, and time was getting late. She had to find a shelter before 9 o'clock. Another stroke of luck. At Brocot, she found shelter at Mr. Germain, who was the mayor of Brocot, and she slept on a sofa in the living room. During the night, the windows were trembling from the nearby bombing. In the morning, Madame Germain, she offered her son to take Marie back in their cow truck, but Marie refused. She said a big vehicle like that would probably attract Allied bombers, and she didn't want to be responsible for any harm coming to the son. So she sets off with her pram again to get home. Now at the Bribourdiere, there was the roadblocks on each road leaving the junction, but she managed to get past. At Pontfremy, Marie couldn't pass. She makes another detour by Criqueville-en-Auge. The road goes up from there. There's a gravel track and it rises 360 feet over 2 miles. She'd never be able to push the pram up there. So she goes to the chateau at Criqueville-en-Auge and she asks the owner, who's a bit haughty, if he's got an employee who could help her push the pram up the hill. He says no, tersely, but his son was there, and the son says, I'll help you. And so they set off towards Grangues. Now, arriving at the end of the lane, she should have given a great sigh of relief, but the fields were pockmarked with bomb craters, and she could see the buildings had been touched, and there was no sign of life. But as she approached, she saw the washerwoman coming out the laundry, and then her 3 children. But where was André? Now he's gone off to Dozulet. One of the papers that Marie gave to passers-by made its way to Grangues, so André now knew where she was. So he went to Cabourg, to the first aid station, where they'd promised to take him to Caen. But they changed their mind, saying that Troan was burning. So he went to Dozulet. So André goes to Dozulet to see the mayor. Now he suggested asking the ambulance, but they would take him, but they didn't have any diesel left. But Monsieur Rupert, he saved the day with some diesel that he'd hidden from the Germans. So they're on their way to Demouville. At the Guillaumes, you find the houses in ruins and some German soldiers are ransacking the place. But he guesses that the Guillaumes would have gone to Saint-Pierre-de-Jonquet, so they go there, and he finds the Guillaumes, and they say, well, Marie left, and she must be at home. So he heads back home. And when he gets there, he finds Marie milking the cows. The 8 men assassinated at Grangues are buried in Ranville cemetery, as well as many of the others. In the village of Grangues, by the church, there's a monument to all the men that died at Grangues. Including a Canadian pilot. Well, thanks for watching to the end. If you want to help the channel, you can always subscribe by clicking this little icon here. Or you might like to watch this video or this video. See you soon.